My favorite Radiohead record is Kid A. I discovered it in 2011 when they were getting buzz for their most recent release, The King of Limbs. I was a young freshman in high school at the time, and I had never heard of Radiohead before. I ended up digging into their discography and came up with 3 records. Their latest, The King of Limbs, which had Lotus Flower on it, which I loved a lot, OK Computer, and Kid A. Of the 3, Kid A had the most captivating hold on me. OK Computer didn't click with me until I was about 19 or so, and King of Limbs, while I enjoyed it at the time and has some decent moments, it definitely was a slightly weaker moment for the group. But Kid A, I got lost in that album for most of my freshman year, unlike anything else before or since, and is to this day my favorite album of all time. It was the first time an album ever felt like an experience to me, and it ignited my passion and appreciation for albums as a medium. Radiohead as an artist in general are an album artist, meaning I think their work is meant to be appreciated within the album context. I think their music just kind of suits that format the best. And I've heard every album. I've collected the more secondary EPs that the band has created. And while Kid A is my personal favorite of theirs, I can't deny another album of theirs that is in its own lane, In Rainbows. In Rainbows is the album that I think most people my age resonate with the most when it comes to Radiohead. Whether it's people like me who are fans of their music and dig into a lot of their stuff, or people who mostly just like Creep, or people who are terrified of Radiohead and terrified of their fans, In Rainbows seems to have appealed to almost everyone in my generation to some capacity. I've been watching YouTubers that are more mainstream and talk about more mainstream music or subjects, or someone on social media that's younger or around my age, and I'll notice an In Rainbows vinyl in the background, which will catch me totally off guard, and it would feel like my two worlds were colliding and my brain would kind of implode for a split second there. And for a more personal anecdote, when I was in college, I worked at my campus's radio station, and I had a specialty show where I would play through albums all the way through from start to finish. Now, I would tend to play a lot of 90s records, so usually people who were older would call in and they would tell me stories about when the album came out and memories that they had affiliated with it. I honestly loved sitting there and hearing some of the stories from that time and just hearing what the music meant to people. Now, I remember one night playing through In Rainbows, and I got a call. I picked up the phone, and it was a younger voice. It was someone around my age, it sounded like. Well, I'm pretty sure it was a student at my college. And she said, "Thanks for playing through In Rainbows. This is one of my favorite albums." And I didn't get calls like that too often, which really spoke to me about the power that In Rainbows has. In Rainbows was released on October 10th, 2007. It is the band's 7th album, and they were coming off of the heels of the hype they had garnered in the early 2000s with records like Kid A. After Hail to the Thief garnered mixed reviews, they took a brief hiatus. Coming back, they wanted to make a record that would be the definitive Radiohead release and really prove that Radiohead was a great band, comparing what they wanted In Rainbows to be to albums like Revolver. And with this album, they succeeded. Whenever I've listened through this record, it has a special hold on me. There's this feeling that whatever my preference is coming in is pretty much irrelevant because In Rainbows is great and it's really an experience in its own avenue that I get to experience over and over again. 15 Steps has this urgency to it. Being the first track, this feels like an invitation. The song rushes you, beckoning you into the album's atmosphere. It's even more impressive that it makes 5/4 timing feel natural. It took me years to realize that this was in 5, which is usually immediately noticeable. Body Snatchers kicks in, and this is such an underrated track on the record. This is the album's loudest explosion and takes the urgency from 15 Steps and rushes it into a frenzy. When it lets you go, you land in Nude. Nude was written during the touring for OK Computer. An original demo you can find online has more of a rock push and an organ that feels pulled straight out of an Al Green track, with the final In Rainbows version feeling more like a lullaby with the spirit of a roar. The song feels like a centerpiece for the album. This is a beloved track for a very good reason. Tom York gives an impeccable vocal performance, and this is coming from a long line of impeccable vocal performances from him. But if you listed all of his performances, Nude would definitely be on top. The type of guitar playing I've always preferred, and as a guitarist myself, was the very specific playing you would hear in genres like alternative rock. There is a technicality to it, but not in the traditional music theory sense, but in a more creative, and to put it in a corny way, grungy way. Johnny Greenwood demonstrates this type of playing throughout all of Radiohead's work, and I think the guitars throughout Weird Fishes arpeggi are a great example of this. I love the individual picking, the arpeggios, so to speak, as per the song title. The color of the chords they're pulling from here really speaks to me and what I want out of guitar playing, and this is guitar playing being pushed to its limits. This is definitely more to evoke texture than a typical guitar part, so this is more of an extreme example, but doesn't detract from the fact that it's incredibly gorgeous guitar playing. As the song goes on, as Tom joins and narrates with his vocal part, the guitars layer and layer more and more until you're fully enveloped in this wall of sound. The guitars interweaving around each other, getting from point A to point B harmonically. I've always loved Ed's vocal part that comes in later on, where he's just kind of beckoning over Tom's part like a call and response, and it's so subtle, and yet it's so massive at the exact same time. This song is a cascade until it just drops out beneath you. I get eaten by the worms and weird fishes, Tom sings. When the outro comes in, an ominous, swelling drone drives the song to totality, a drastic tonal shift from the heavenly beginning of the tune. We're at the bottom of the ocean now, and we just escape it. If there is a single song that captures In Rainbows, it has to be this one. This song is In Rainbows to me, even more so than Nude. Ever since I was a kid and I listened to this album, this song was always an album moment for me. It's like the album moment. Similar to exit music on OK Computer, and even including how exit music segues into Let Down, kind of like how that's a moment on OK Computer as well. I think Weird Fishes, for me, is the moment on In Rainbows. There is another, but we'll get there when we get there. All I Need carries a boom bap inspired drum part, carried with a lot more fragility. Colin Greenwood's bass comes in, distorted, carrying an incredible bass line. The beat on this track knocks. Tom whispers about all these things he is to somebody, emphasizing his yearning to be with that person. I am a moth who just wants to share your light. I am an insect trying to get out of the dark. You are all I need, he sings. These smaller shreds of sound scrape around the mix, barely nudging in and out. The whole kind of process is very, very tender. And then the outro. When that piano starts up, you get the sense that it's warning you that something's coming, and then it comes. This outro is like a hurricane, just blasting you endlessly. Johnny is well known for his string sections, and this is a great reason why. What sounds like a blend of strings and brass instruments, this single dissonant chord just awakens in the middle of the band, picking up the pace here, and it only gets louder and louder and more intense. It's a whirlwind of a closer and leaves you feeling like you've been conquered by something. Now, I keep bringing up lyrics, and it's important to recognize that Radiohead's lyrics are generally nonsensical. Thom Yorke is attributed for picking random non sequiturs out of a hat and using them as lyrics on Kid A. This is how songs like Everything in Its Right Place were made, and the line about yesterday I woke up sucking a lemon, and it was dubbed genius. And it is, don't get me wrong. And to some, lyrics are everything. Literal storytelling is everything, and lyrics that don't make literal sense or direct sense is going to be a turnoff for some. And to me, I'm kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, where I never liked lyrics that were too literal. I love lyrics that are more abstract. Hell, even lyrics to me that don't make any direct sense whatsoever. But it's not that simple, because when they're done right, it fits the music and it feels like it makes sense. And that's all that really matters. It allows the imagination to run wild. It feels freeing. I just love that. I can't put it into words, really. Now, a lot of the lyrics on In Rainbows are actually pretty straightforward for Radiohead, but you still have your typical surrealist, imagery-laden lyrics all over this album, and it is a trademark for Radiohead's music, and I wanted to kind of point that out. Faustarp feels like an intermission, and I mean that in the most respectful way possible. A somber acoustic track with some beautiful strings accompanying. It's a lovely little tune, and they wear their Beatles' White Album influence right on their sleeve here. It reminds me of some of the smaller tracks on that album in a similar way that those were kind of transition tracks in between the larger tracks. It's short, it's sweet, it's a break from how intense the rest of the album is. It's stepping outside for a breath of fresh air before continuing on. Reckoner is another standout for most people, and for good reason. It's marvelous. Tom's falsetto shines here. The filtered, echoey drums create this distant feel. Tambourine panned left, drums hard right. The song utilizes an AABA form, with the A section being a very simple, discrete, esoteric melodic statement that just kind of hovers in place. The B section is visceral, just Johnny and Tom leaning in for what feels like a moment of introspection. The strings swoop in, and the song just kind of glistens in zero gravity for a second before leaping back to the A section. It's a beautiful track. It deserves all the hype that it gets. And now we've come to my favorite song on the album, House of Cards. The opening guitar is iconic, and I remember exactly where I was when I first heard it and I was first listening through this album. I was listening on my iPod Touch, walking through my high school hallways into the cafeteria. This song puts me in a trance every single time I hear it, and kind of like how it did that first time that I did. The drum rhythm is very irregular. It's almost like a reggae beat, but it's slightly off kilter, and it doesn't have that swing feel, but it has that kind of propulsion. It's very kind of similar in the way that kind of works. Everything is drenched in reverb, and that's another thing to point out about the sound of In Rainbows. Everything drowns in reverb in the best way possible. I love dry sounding production, and I love warm sounding albums. And typically Radiohead records are pretty dry and pretty warm, and they embody a great production style. And thanks to their producer Nigel Godrich, who they've worked with since OK Computer and actually even a couple tracks on the Bends. The band even considers him a band member because of just how instrumental he is in the processes of making their albums. I like when things are small, tight, and tangible in the mix. It feels more relatable to me, which is something that very few modern records capture anymore. Usually most things are overly wide, overly big, cavernous in a way that isn't quite the same as on here. But I don't like when reverbs and delays are used to make something just feel bigger. I like when they're used for effect and when they're clearly audible. And In Rainbows is a great example of that. Nigel Godrich is who we thank for that again, and he's done all of Radiohead's work, and he did a really incredible job capturing them on In Rainbows. And he's a big part of as to why Radiohead's sound sounds the way it does over the years. But House of Cards is the other album moment I was talking about alongside Weird Fishes. I think for a lot of people that's Reckoner, Nude even, but the whole album is sealed tight, so this is going to be subjective, and everyone is correct in a way. For me, House of Cards is the other definitive track that just captures the spirit of what In Rainbows is about. Jigsaw Falling Into Place has actually made the rounds in recent years. It's become one of Radiohead's top streamed tracks on Spotify, and I don't know why. There's whatever the reason that happened, I don't know. Irregardless, this was always my least favorite song on In Rainbows, and that's saying something, because I do still love this song to death. When Tom swings his voice up during that part where he goes, the beat goes round and round, this shit is on. I loved the guitar work on this track when I was a kid. It goes back to that playing style that I always looked out for. There's a desperation in this song, an urge for contact that isn't quite being met. Talking about social interaction, two people trying to grow closer during a night out, but it not quite landing perfectly, and the frustration of it all. Just capturing a very, very zoomed in look at that atmosphere, which is pretty much what the entire album does. People say that Radiohead is a sad band that makes sad music for creepy, sad people. And I have to object and say that I think Radiohead always stuck out to me as more romantic than sad. Different tones of romance, different shades depending on the song, and perhaps the two emotions share the same bed. But I'm going to stand on that claim that Radiohead is a romantic artist, and I'll defend that. We close out with Videotape. I usually don't like piano ballads, and to call this that or any piano-driven track Radiohead has done, like Pyramid Song or Sail to the Moon, again, that just feels derogatory calling it a piano ballad. But this song always touched me. A very simple form, brief melodic phrase, ending with the word videotape, before an interlude swells up and Tom hums a gorgeous vocal line around these oscillating, skittering drum machines that create this audible illusion of something revolving or orbiting. It's a very strange song, and while it may be easy to look at it as, oh, they're ending the album with a somber song, which is the oldest trick in the book, this is not that at all. Videotape is an open-ended conclusion, leaving you in orbit rather than bringing you down for a landing. And that is In Rainbows. While many look at OK Computer and say that that is the album that changed music and affects people the most, and I'm not doubting that it did, I feel like In Rainbows is the album that deserves that attribute nowadays. More specifically with more people around my age, I think my generation has more been impacted by In Rainbows than OK Computer. And I imagine being a teen or an adult in the late 90s when OK Computer and Kid A came out, the impact was hard to avoid. And I already said, Kid A is my personal favorite Radiohead project, but I'm an outlier here, I feel like. Kid A definitely feels like it came out in a time before my time, and that's because it did. And I can't deny that even when I put on In Rainbows, I feel more in tune somehow with this album. In Rainbows feels like my Radiohead record, if that makes sense. In tandem, I think it's my generation's OK Computer. And I love OK Computer too, don't get me wrong. I'm trying to shed light on the way the work stands in a more objective way, which is challenging to do. To put it as straight as possible, In Rainbows had the effect and hold on my generation that OK Computer had on its generation. And that's without overcomplicating it. In Rainbows is a two-sided thing here. We have the artistry, and making this video, I thought that was the major thing I was going to be focusing on. And of course, the artistry comes first, and it's an impeccable record. It has a very special power to it. But I began to remember how In Rainbows came out, and I realized that the music business side of In Rainbows, the release of it, and the logistics of how it landed is also massive. In Rainbows carved out the modern music business landscape we've been living in since this album came out in 2007. For better or for worse. Radiohead fulfilled their contract with their longtime label EMI, and feeling taken advantage of by the industry as a whole, they didn't sign a new contract, but they split and went their own ways. Radiohead wanted to release music independently, without the need of a label. And on October 10th, 2007, they shared a website that allowed people to put in whatever price they wanted for the album, even free if they wanted, and then let them download In Rainbows in its entirety. Now you may be saying, well, Alex, that's just Bandcamp. And well, actually Bandcamp was founded in 2008. So if anything, there's a good chance Bandcamp was perhaps inspired by In Rainbows. This is the first serious instance of the self-release model being exercised by a major level artist. There were some earlier attempts that skirted on the surface of this. In 2000, the Smashing Pumpkins leaked Machina 2. It was a disc 2 of their album Machina that their label didn't let them release due to poor sales. So they leaked it to radio stations, and the stations then mastered it and leaked it online for free, and fans kind of circulated it that way. You also had John Frusciante, who released an album for free online in 2001 on his website that fans could download. But this was all for free, and it carried itself in a very unofficial way, similar to kind of how Napster worked at the time. But In Rainbows was a legit transaction being held by the band themselves officially for an official project that they were releasing. And people did buy it. I actually remember hearing that one fan spent thousands of dollars on it because they loved Radiohead that much. And again, you could voluntarily put in whatever price you want. So they were giving the consumer, their listeners, their fans, complete control over the transaction pretty much. The self-release model is now the norm for most smaller and local musicians around you, and that you see on social media every day. Back then, when they did this was seen as like this jarring thing. It was in the news.
What was the most difficult part of doing it yourself, the DIY aspect of it?
Getting the wording right on the website was quite tricky.
That was interesting.
I know that might sound a bit superficial, but actually how to get it across to people that this was you're making a donation, we're asking how you word it, without sounding pompous or irrelevant or irreverent, rather.
Or irrelevant.
Or irrelevant. That was pretty tricky.
And you had no real idea of the consequences at all. You had no idea how it was going to work out because it was a brand new model, if you think about it. People hadn't really done this before, certainly not on your level. So was it an exciting thing saying, let's throw it out there and see what happens?
Oh, it was certainly exciting. It was, because there was a few meetings that we, were sitting down and just finished doing the record, had it in a box, wanted to put it up, and just, free of all the mechanics, all the drudgery of the whole thing, having not basically talked to anybody, done any interviews, any explanation, and nothing. So basically nobody knew outside the camp.
Some people thought it was asinine. Some people respected them for it. Some people viewed it as like a kamikaze move. This was an unheard of thing to do at the time. Radiohead kind of pioneered that, for better or for worse.
Welcome to 120 Minutes. I'm Matt Pinfield. Tonight on the show, we'll have an MTV premiere from Live, as well as brand new videos from Fiona Apple, The Toasters, Guided by Voices, Souls, Papas Fritas, and my special guests will be Radiohead. Welcome back to 120 Minutes. I'm Matt Pinfield, and I'm here with Radiohead. I'm here with Ed, Tom, and Johnny. Good to have you guys here. How are you?
Good. Yeah, not too bad.
Yeah, good to have you back. A new album coming out on July 1st called OK Computer.
Yeah.
Which is called, speaking of which, I guess, I heard that you had said there was kind of a cross, Ed, between Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody and the Pixies for this single. All right.
I'll probably get myself into trouble here. But yeah, I mean, it was also, I mean, more so probably like Beatles' Happiness is a Warm Gun. We basically we had 3.5 songs, and when we were rehearsing, we just spent a week trying to fit them together. Yeah. And just trying to do something different for our own amusement initially at first.
Yeah,
now for everyone else's now.
Actually took a good year, didn't it?
Yeah.
Not a week.
Well, yeah, but rehearsing, you know,
yeah.
we just spent a week rehearsing on that one song.
It was like we had 3 helpful songs we didn't know what to do with, and you can tell.
Radiohead was a big act. They were played on MTV. And for those watching this that are young, and I was pretty young when MTV was dwindling out a bit, but I do remember that MTV was like, take TikTok, but take the For You curated feed that's curated by an algorithm based on what you like and what you want, and make it the exact same set thing that everyone saw. A one-stop shop for music videos, what was popular, talk shows, more specialty shows, and interviews, all driven around music. And ultimately, it was a window into pop culture. Every now and then they would have actors, and they would interview actors about a new movie that was coming out, and other forms of media, but it largely centered around music, since MTV stood for music television. And it depended on when you tuned in, what you saw, and you had zero control over what played. Later on, there was TRL, which was Total Request Live, where you could call in and you could request what music video you wanted to see. But I'm not going to get into that. That was more of a novelty show for a while, and it was a huge hit, and you could say that that was MTV's kind of last peak, but that was different. The majority of MTV's existence, you couldn't control what was played. MTV was the industry for a while. It was the target that most artists throughout the 80s, 90s, and some of the 2000s, the artists that wanted to make a name for themselves, they aimed to get on MTV, with labels and MTV executives being the gatekeepers and curators of what you saw. Depending on how you look at it, MTV was worse than what we have now. And depending on how you look at it, MTV was better than what we have now. MTV offered no consumer control, and meaning that what played wasn't dictated by the viewers like most things are now on the internet or with streaming services. Some people will say that MTV sucked because you'd have to sit through songs and things that you hated and wouldn't want to see, just to hope that what you wanted to hear came on, and maybe it wouldn't. And some would turn and say that the experience would expose you to certain things that you wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise. This experience is what allowed a lot of artists to blow up that otherwise wouldn't have, from major pop stars like Madonna, Prince. These household names were established entirely because of MTV. And even names that weren't traditional pop music, Nirvana's explosion in the early 1990s would not have happened without MTV. Back then, artists had a more set trajectory in terms of establishing themselves as artists in the industry. Go out, play, catch a label's attention, maybe the label would cut you a record deal, and if it was a bigger label, you'd shoot a video and they'd try to get you on MTV and radio. And again, luck was at play there too. And with luck, artists would get a turn on that carousel, so to speak. And if the dice fell right and people liked what they were doing, when they hit big, they hit big. And Radiohead hit big, a few times in fact. Their song Creep was a massive hit largely due to repeated rotation on MTV, and that was their claim to fame. Other videos like Fake Plastic Trees, My Iron Lung, and Paranoid Android also made the rounds on MTV. They garnered their following during the MTV era. Ditching a label and releasing music independently back then was unheard of. It was what Prince fantasized about when he walked around in the 90s with slave written on his face when battling about ownership over his music with Sony, who was his label at the time. The older industry did have serious pitfalls that shouldn't be ignored. There's a clip of the girl from TLC talking about how the label had left them with no money.
This is how a group can sell 10 million records and be broke.
It's funny to me that back then we complained that artists were broke and the record labels or the management's to blame. Now, we complain about how artists are broke and we blame streaming services like Spotify. And while the future we live in now was hailed as the solution back then, It's same shit, different day, if you ask me. Radiohead, an artist of that generation, got the best of both worlds. In having the following from that older industry where the platform you landed on if you had hits was far, far bigger than now, and in embracing that independent control that came with the internet age a bit before anyone else did on a professional level. Spreading music on the internet back then was affiliated with Napster. Napster was piracy. Piracy was bad. Therefore, sharing music on the internet was seen as a bad thing. It almost had a derogatory ring to it. There was iTunes that took the concept of the MP3 and made it legal, rather than taking away that derogatory piracy tone to it. But that was Apple, and the digital future was supposed to be independent from corporations. And spoiler alert, we didn't do a very good job at that. And that was the red tape that In Rainbows tore down. They carved out a self-release model on a professional level that all upcoming and smaller artists use now, circumventing predatory labels, greedy executives, and networks like MTV. Again, they carved out the modern music landscape for better or for worse. Editor Alex coming in live here. I think something else I wanted to bring up was the fact that MTV was just a platform. MTV wasn't a cheat code to get famous. Getting onto MTV didn't mean that by default you were going to blow up. MTV was just the place that music videos played. It was just the platform at the time. There were tens of thousands of artists that played on MTV. Not all of them ended up being Michael Jackson. Not all of them ended up being Nirvana. You know, there were thousands of artists, tens of thousands of artists and songs that did well, that people liked, and maybe the act saw moderate success off of it, but they didn't blow up and become superstars. Again, MTV was just the platform, whereas back then the platform had to be earned. There was this hazing ritual you had to go through. There was A&R guys, record labels, and then the MTV executives if you impressed them. And if they all gave you the green light, then you kind of earned a seat on the carousel, so to speak, and they'd be like, okay, well, we'll play you. And then getting on there was just part of it, because then it was like, okay, you're getting played on MTV. Do people like you? Do they want to go out and buy your music? Now, the platform is in everybody's pocket, readily accessible to anyone, everywhere, all the time. And you can say that the gatekeeping comes afterwards, but I don't think you can really call it that, because sure, we're the gatekeepers, but we're more like judges, kind of assessing everything that's out there now. It's wild how different it is. And I don't think you can say one was better or worse than the other. It was just different. Difference an understatement. MTV was a different dimension. Bands like Radiohead really were in the middle of that world fading out and this world fading in. And I do think Radiohead were a push in this direction of where we are now, but I don't think they were the push. I think ultimately the major culprit was the internet. I mean, the internet changed everything. It completely changed the world. And I don't think there's a better reflection of that than looking at how much the music industry was flipped on its head and completely flipped inside out. It's just wild. And again, I don't think you can be like, oh, well, MTV was better, what we have now is better. There's no comparison. It's just two different dimensions here. MTV was a different world. It was just different. Things were just different back then. I think with the rise of artists self-releasing their own music and that being the new norm, I feel like, there's sort of no gatekeeping anymore. And so the idea of artists being free to release whatever they want, however they want, seems really great. But the thing is that not everything on the internet is good. There's always been not good music, but I think the bad that you would have found on MTV back in the day doesn't match the bad you would find on the internet for whatever the reason, whether they just can't play or the songs aren't good. It can be, the results may vary in terms of stuff that isn't good. It sort of leaves me yearning for some sort of quality assurance, which I think is completely absent in the internet age. I don't think that gatekeeping is innately a bad thing. I think it can kind of protect the craft, of music, because I care about music more so than just entertainment. But as a craft, it's like you want music to be good, you know? Like, I kind of long for some sort of a gatekeeping process in the way that used to exist that just doesn't exist anymore. I'm not blaming Radiohead for bad music that comes out nowadays. I just think that with the lack of some sort of a gatekeeping process, there's a lot more noise to cut through now. There is that statistic that's gone around that says that, you know, there was more music released in a single day in 2024 than there was in the entirety of 1989. There is something to consider with this. In 1989, people didn't have the tools to sort of access the platform. People didn't have tools to share their work online like people can now. People have been making music since the beginning of time. People have been writing songs in their bedrooms, and back then they recorded on little cassette tapes, and there were little hardware recorders that you could buy back in the day. But it still drives home the point that there is just so much noise on the internet, and some of it isn't even great at all. Some of it's terrible, you know? And it all leaves me yearning for some of that quality assurance, a little bit of that gatekeeping and the kind of singularity that something like MTV and that world had. And I don't want cable television to come back. Cable television was not good. Cable television kind of sucked. MTV isn't coming back. I don't want it to come back. What we have now at large, I think, is better than what we had then. I mean, me being able to make a video like this, having the freedom to do that, and everyone else being able to do something like that, I think that's important. I think that's better than what existed back then. But I still kind of yearn for some of the traits that came from an industry like it was back then, the quality assurance, the kind of singular hub that everyone kind of had to tune into to kind of keep up with what was going on, but also for creatives to kind of aim for. It was like this kind of clubhouse that everyone aimed for. And having that, but also having something that lets artists have that modern independence and the creative control and freedom that our current times let them have. And I don't know if that's possible. And this probably sounds like the part where I'm supposed to turn to you and say, and this is how I'm going to introduce my new service that's going to attempt to do that. I don't have jack shit. I don't have a service. I want something that doesn't exist. And I don't even know if it's possible to do, to balance that way, but that's what I want. And again, In Rainbows helped carve out the current musical landscape, for better or for worse. Thank you very much. This song's for Jubilee 2000.